Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, 102 years since the San Remo Resolution, What We Must Do to Defend Israel's Legal Rights. My name is Agnes Imani, and I'm the Chief Administrative Officer at Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights and your host today. We would like to welcome our panelists, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Mordechai Kedar and Advocate Yifa Segal. We would also like to welcome our moderators, Irving Weisdor, co-chair of Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights, Goldi Steiner, founder and co-chair of Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights, and Doug Altabef, chairman of the board of Tirtzu. We have a special guest and a surprise feature for you today. Please stay tuned for the next 90 minutes. We will be holding a short Q&A at the end of the webinar if time permits. Please submit all your questions in the Q&A box. I would like to pass it on to Goldi Steiner, founder and co-chair of Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights, who will reveal this big surprise. Goldi, take it away.
Shalom, bonjour. My name is Goldi Steiner, founder of Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights and co-chair with Irving Weisdor, with whom you will be meeting later in the program. I wish to thank our attendees for your time and interest. And special thanks to the signers of the petition, the campaign to have the government declare San Remo a national holiday called Yom San Remo. We will continue to circulate the petition and ask those of you who have not signed us yet to do so. Every name will be inscribed on a scroll and will be presented to the government in due time to be archived in perpetuity. So please continue to sign and spread the word. Our sincere thanks go to our co-sponsors for supporting us, and we ask you to join our campaign to double the signers list of 1,050 so far to 2010. The importance of this campaign cannot be stressed sufficiently. As an example, we are just one day after the holiday of Pesach, and in the cusp of celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut. Through these and other holidays, the entire world knows the history of Exodus, as well as the declaration of Israel's independence. So too will Yom San Remo be learned by students and grown-ups the world over as the most significant event in the history of the Jewish people. And now, the first of two surprises we mentioned. One is a minute snapshot of the inauguration of San Remo Square in Netanya, known as San Remo's twin city, by Mayor Miriam Feuerberg-Icar and Ambassador Gianluigi Benedetti of Italy. This, in our opinion, is the first step in the right direction. David, the video, please.
מי ייתן והכדור הפורח שבחרנו להציב בכיכר יפיץ מנתניה ומסן רמו את בשורת הפיוס והאחווה בין אנשים, עמים ומדינות ביקום כולו.
Amicizia. E ringrazio tutti voi questa sera per essere stati qua. Grazie.
Introduce you to our surprise guest, retired Major General and former MK Uzi Dayan, who will speak for himself about his major contribution to help make Yom San Remo become a reality. Uzi, to you.
Thank you very much. Toda shalom from Israel to everybody. Thank you first of all, the people here, my colleagues. You're a very small group of people who actually know what the San Remo conference is all about. Most Israelis are not familiar with San Remo conference and the San Remo resolution. And we know now that it was one of the most important achievements of the Zionist movement, but it's still very much needed to explain why we need a bill and why we know people to know about it. Now, basically in Judaism, everything which says remember, and the noun remember is the most common noun in the Bible, but almost every time with remember comes to keep, zachor v'shamor, to remember and to keep. This is a very important basic value in Judaism. This is actually what we are trying to do with this bill. The idea is that the bill will make a day of commemoration. The Knesset, the parliament, will address it, and the different committees of the parliament, of the Knesset, will talk about it and make their decisions. The government is going to, in this day, going to make its remark, the armed forces, and most important than everybody, the education system, the formal and the informal education system, I mean schools and the youth movement and youth organization, etc. Now, why it's that important to remember and to keep and to do something with it? It happens 102 years ago, and now many people know about it. And why it's so important? So first of all, it is important because we want to give all the people, we want to supply ammunition to people like you, to people who are listening to us, the people who are going to know about it, and they are going to know what is this resolution, why it's so important, and why it's still valid. It was never turned about, and it was never overturned, and this is maybe the most important resolution, more important than Kaftet in November, that the 29th of November, and even the Balfour Declaration, because actually what happened in San Remo, adopted the Balfour Declaration, but also charged England, the UK, in order to fulfill it. And this is still the situation today. The second important issue is, you know, I was the head of the Security Committee in all the negotiations of Israel, with the Palestinians, with the Syrians, with the Egyptians, with the Jordanians, and people try not to talk about this resolution. They try to avoid comforting because it's a very strong one. So by doing it, we actually force our opponents to refer to it. And then we are in a very good situation. And maybe the most important one is something to do not with the past, but with the future. Let me give you one number. In the year 2048, when Israel will be 100 years of independence, the expected number of Israeli citizens are going to be 20 million. You have to be an Israeli to appreciate such a big, such a number, 20 million. And when we are going to be 20 million, we will need, first of all, infrastructure, and then security. How we are going to accommodate 20 million people. By the way, 15 million of them are going to be Jewish, which means there will be more Jews in Israel than there are now all over the globe. And then that's make people understand why we are so much want Israel to be the state of the Jewish people and not just Jewish democratic state. Now 20 million people will need infrastructure, will need defensible borders. By the way, the average distance between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea is 40 miles. That's all, 40 miles. This is where Israel talk about strategic depths. We are talking about 40 miles. And two, we need a good line of defense to protect Israel, to defend Israel against a threat from the outside, enemy from the outside. And here comes exactly this so important resolution, because it gives Israel the legitimacy to build a Jewish democratic state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. And this is why I put down this bill in the previous Knesset, in previous sitting of the parliament, and the idea that it will be taught in Israel and it will be a day of commemoration, and but we are not allowed to sit down and wait to the Israeli politics to do his job, because Israel politics nowadays is occupied with other issues. I hope very much, because this bill was tabled, that it will take some time, but it will be a bill in Israel. And until that, it's very important that we will advance these issues. The place, the square in Netanya was mentioned here, but we are pushing it forward. I just talked to our ambassador in Italy, in Rome, Dror Eda, and you know, is now in San Remo, because they gather some people in San Remo. Lord Balfour is there, not that Lord Balfour, is a processor, and another Lord, and other people and Christians who are on behalf of Israel in Europe, and they are now in San Remo. They are not going to call a square in San Remo in the name of Miriam Fairberg or Netanya, but those are very important things to do, and what you are doing now is very, very important. You know, we want people in Israel, we want people all around, we want people defend and support Israel to know. And let me just say, as I mentioned in Jewish, in Yehudit, we have to remember and we have to keep. And this is what we are doing, and we are going to succeed in it with God's help. So for everything that you are doing, and especially for that event, thank you very much. Toda rabba.
Thank you, Uzi. And I'm glad to inform you that a second bill has been introduced to the Knesset by MK Yom Tov Kalfon in December 2021, whom we could not reach for further details, but we will keep you posted of further developments. Next, our sincere thanks to the panelists, and I take the opportunity to call them friends of many years, for honoring us today by sharing their vast knowledge on today's topic. And last, and certainly not least, thanks to the team of our esteemed partner organization, Tirtzu, Eitan Meir, Matan Peleg, and others, who helped organize this webinar and make our association a pleasurable and fruitful experience. I now call on Doug Altabef, Chairman of the Board of Tirtzu, to say a few words and introduce our first panelist. To you, Doug.
Thank you, Goldi. Wonderful to be at yet another conference with CILR. As Goldi said, we at Tirtzu have a long history, a very productive history of educating our fellow Israelis in matters that are critically important. And Uzi said something very important in his introductory remarks, and that is, we can be wealthy, we can be powerful, but if we don't have the conviction, if we don't have the real deep-seated understanding of what it is that has brought us to this miraculous table that we are sitting at, why we are such a special place, how we got here, and what it will take to keep us here. That's what's going to enable us, please God, to have 15 million Jews in Israel come to 2048. So there's a lot to look forward to. Goldi, Steiner and Irving Weisdor and all the people at CILR are hitting way above their weight in having an impact on that knowledge, on that conviction. And we look forward at Tirtzu to many years of productive partnership together. Let me now introduce our first speaker, and this is a real pleasure for me because we're going to be hearing from someone who has done something very, very significant in this country, and that is to harness the law in the cause of social political betterment. Yifa Segal is someone who has made a very fascinating career out of not only being a lawyer, but being a lawyer who makes a difference. And this idea of harnessing the law to effect a larger reality really is, Yifa, if I might say, your career is sort of a microcosm of what San Remo represents, which is a legal event that had profound political ripple effects. Yifa has law degrees from Haifa University, international relations degree from Tel Aviv University. She has a great resume in terms of being involved with impactful organizations, whether it's Taspit News Agency, our dear friends at Shirat Hadin. She founded a very important organization, the International Legal Forum here in Israel. She spent time as chief of staff to the Israel's ambassador to the United States. And now more recently, she is consulting to a number of organizations, including the UK lawyers, United Kingdom Lawyers for Israel, which like CILR is trying to help the situation here, as trying to help Israel standing around the world through the use of legal techniques, lawfare if necessary. So Yifa, let's first look at some of the legal, if we're looking at the law as a way of impacting a larger social and political reality. Let's start by looking at San Remo. San Remo, as we know, comes 3 years after the Balfour Declaration. Give us a sense of what it represents in terms of a departure or a building process, a cumulative growing process from Balfour.
Okay, well, thank you, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here, Goldi, as always, and everyone here. I think it's an amazing partnership between these amazing organizations, and it's great to see everyone. So thank you for inviting me. And to dive right into your question, Doug. So the Balfour Declaration was huge. I mean, if you think about the time in history for the Jewish people, we're talking about 1917, the political aspect of the Zionist movement. And I think I'm just going to open brackets for a second and say that I believe Zionism existed since forever. It's just this certain, let's say, manifestation of its political goals or the organizational structure of its political goals started at the end of the 19th century. So if you look at, it took less than 50 years for this new Zionist political movement to achieve this unbelievable declaration or statement from the United Kingdom, which was, by far the most influential, powerful, significant empire at the time. And also it was before the Allied powers won the war, the First World War, but it already was pretty clear that the Allies are going to win the war, and that the United Kingdom is going to be the empire that is going to control or be more dominant in shaping the future of this region, particularly the land of Israel. So you see in November of 1917, this public endorsement, this statement of accepting and acknowledging the fact that the Jewish people have rights, that we have historical rights, that this is our ancestral homeland. I mean, this is something that wasn't even, most Jews didn't even dare to really actively dream about for centuries. And here you see this amazing development. What people don't realize is that although it was an amazing statement and such a powerful moment in our history of the Jewish people, it was only a political statement, and it's not a small thing. It's a huge thing. I mean, if you look at our politicians today, if you see a head of state making a statement, making a promise, then of course we can all rely on that. We can push for it to be fulfilled. We can use it and to then later on reference it and say this was an acknowledgement of our rights, but it's not a legal obligation. There's no way to bind a politician, and certainly not a state, based on a statement, a political statement like that. So we need to understand that Balfour was as important and valuable as it was as a political statement. It was not a legal document. It was not a legal obligation. It was not binding in any way. And so what happened in San Remo, and we can talk for days actually about the entire political development from November 2nd until finally San Remo was adopted in 1920. The Allies have changed their minds probably a million times. Political interests varied, and many different forces, including the Hashemites and others, have influenced it one way or another. But eventually, what the Allied power have decided to do was to take the language of the Balfour Declaration and make it into a binding legal promise. And this is very, 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 very different. And I think this is the importance of San Remo, is that we can always talk about, and we are talking, maybe not even enough, right, about our spiritual, religious, historical, national rights and connections to this land. We can talk about our political rights. We can talk about it in a million different ways. But what San Remo does, or did basically, is also give it another level, which is a legal, a foothold in a world that then gives us another dimension that cannot be refuted by the international community. Of course, they try, and as a part of their efforts to, let's say, not fulfill the promise that was given in San Remo, is basically ignoring it or downplaying it. But I think, Doug, I told you on the phone when we spoke, is that I believe that on every level, that if we conduct the argument of what is the Jewish claim or Jewish rights to the land of Israel, I think we win on every level. If it's a moral level, we win, and if it's an historical level, we win, and if it's a national, religious, we can win on every level. But I think also, and again, what is so unique and important about San Remo is that grants us, among other things, by the way, but that grants us also the ability to undoubtedly win the argument also on a legal level, and that is what is so important about San Remo.
So we go, in effect, from the aspiration of Balfour. Balfour is an aspirational document issued by one government, the United Kingdom, to San Remo, which is a codification and it's issued by really the leading countries of the world, the victorious Allied powers in World War I. It is not one country. How does that then get kicked upstairs, so to speak, or how does that get further codified in terms of the League of Nations and then ultimately into the United Nations?
Okay, so, well, first, I just want to clarify that the Balfour Declaration was, well, the British government thought about this very, very carefully. It was not a promise made by a government. It was a letter or a statement made by Balfour to Rothschild at the time. I mean, this is not a coincidence. I mean, they thought about this in a way that will be like this grand gesture and this grand statement, but can in no way obligate them or create any legal obligation for the government of the United Kingdom. And so that's why also we need to understand that the significance of Balfour was just political. And going forward to San Remo, then you see it being, as you said, codified or creating a legal promise made by the Allied powers. And then that resolution, the San Remo resolution, and was later translated, of course, to the mandate of Palestine, right? Basically creating a trustee system or making the United Kingdom the trustee to fulfill the promise or the obligation that was created in San Remo. And this whole thing is adopted and accepted by the League of Nations. And the League of Nations, as I'm sure everyone knows on this call, but this is the predecessor of the United Nations. And there's one very, very important difference between a resolution made by the United Nations today and one that was adopted by the League of Nations then, and that is the ability of the General Assembly to create law, international law. Their resolutions, the League of Nations resolutions, were accepted as the creation of international law, the creation of an international obligation, a legal obligation. Today, that's not the case. The United Nations can adopt every resolution under the sun. It means absolutely nothing. It's just a playground for all the countries of the world to kind of fight each other, and no one really follows too closely the resolutions of the United Nations because it doesn't really mean anything, and they all know it. It wasn't the case back in the day, and so basically by adopting San Remo, by creating the mandate for Palestine, by getting the League of Nations to formally adopt it, what they did is create international binding obligation under international law, and that has a tremendous significance. And then when you ask about the United Nations, well, first of all, they took it upon themselves in their charter, in the charter that established the United Nations, to not infringe upon any rights or obligations that were adopted by their predecessor, the League of Nations. So basically, they're taking on the responsibility to honor and to fulfill and to advance any rights or any obligations or any promises that was given by the League of Nations, including the San Remo resolution and the mandate for Palestine, which means that even today, 2022, this is still in effect, and this promise is still binding, and it's time for all of us to stand up and say, it's time for you all to respect it.
I think that's a critical point, Yifa, that the codification that San Remo represents, which is then taken in by the League of Nations and then is swallowed whole, so to speak, by the United Nations, so that the very DNA of the United Nations includes that which San Remo represents, which is that there will be a homeland for the Jewish people in what was mandatory Palestine. And so when we have all these discussions today about, does Israel have a right to exist? Certainly the United Nations, where a lot of that skepticism is voiced, is really very much duty bound to say, yes, absolutely, it's a done deal. It's not even a matter open for question. Is that a fair statement?
It's 100%, Doug. It's a fair statement, but I wouldn't even. I don't think we even have to go as far as that. I mean, we are witnessing right now the war between Russia and the Ukraine, and I think all of us in the Western world look at Russia as the aggressor, and we all have criticism toward the Russian behavior. But I've never heard anyone say that Russia does not have a right to exist, that its current leadership is then somehow making it like an illegitimate state or an illegitimate entity, or the Russian people are illegitimate. I mean, this is only fair somehow when it comes to Israel or the Jewish people, and therefore I definitely think that you're right about your statement. But again, I don't even think we have to go that far.
Well, it's not that we have to go that far for proof, but we do have to go that far to remind people, because it's dafka, because you point out that we somehow are always the odd man out, as it were, that the world needs to be reminded that the great powers took it upon themselves. No one forced them to do this. This was something that they took upon themselves to codify and then to have enshrined in the League of Nations, which then became enshrined in the United Nations. So it's easy to be very cynical about how the United Nations works or how political judgments work. But sometimes, and I think this is where Goldi and her people have done such important work, you really have to come back to first principles and remind people, say, wait a minute, your point, Yifa, is a great one, that the rogues and the villains of various countries doesn't mean that the country itself is illegitimate, has lost its right to statehood. Somehow that seems only to apply to us. And I think precisely, like I say, precisely because so many people are willing to put us into play, as it were, that it's very important, even though I agree with you, we don't need it, quote unquote, but we do need to remind people about it.
Yes, I agree that we have to remind people about it. I also think it's important, and I allow myself to say this because this is, this is what I do, what I have been doing for over a decade. I deal with the legal aspects of things. And so I allow myself to say, to look at the cynicism in the way that, I call it a pseudo type of legal arguments are used against Israel to argue that somehow we are illegitimate or we lack the morale or any type of legitimacy for our existence. And I think it's a battling tool that is used and abused so cynically, and it's just completely false. Even the type of arguments or terminology that they use to make it seem like it's legal arguments is usually false. They make up these terms that don't even exist in international law. And so the point I want to make here, Doug, is that, as I said, I can have this argument on a moral basis, on an historical basis, on a religious basis, even on a de facto who has control of the territory type of basis. But because this is now have been taken to the legal battling ground, let's say, I think it's important, it's crucial for each and every one of us to know the argument so that we can answer with confidence that, we do have the most fundamental legal rights to live in this land, to have established the Jewish state, the state of Israel, to keep it, to hold it, to safeguard it. And everything is based on legal legitimacy that, honestly, I don't even believe most countries even have that run that deep. So I think we all have to, because this is how it is now, we all need to familiarize ourselves with the legal arguments and make sure that we can win an argument on every one of these levels.
We only have a couple of more minutes for our session, Yifa, but maybe, is there a perspective you want to share in terms of the motivation of the parties to San Remo? You're a very astute political analyst. Is there something that attended this that was in addition to or motivated them to take the step of legal codification?
Well, I think it's a mixture of things. I think the Jewish leadership at the time, Chaim Weizmann was one of them, Aaron Aronson was another. There were a few, major, I think, icons and people that we owe a great debt to in the history of the Jewish people and the establishment of the state of Israel, that have done tremendous work in first explaining and getting people, non-Jewish political actors and leaders, to kind of familiarize them with Jewish history and Jewish rights and the reality of the Jewish minority all over the world. And so I think they really touched and got through to a lot of these people in making them understand why it is just, why this really is the right thing to do. And I think that has a very powerful part in getting us to that point. First, Balfour Declaration, and as we said, then leading up to adopting the Remo resolution. But I honestly do believe, and I've read a lot about this, it was also very cynical. I mean, some of the players also thought this would best serve their own interest and would harm the political interest of other groups that they didn't really want to trust. And this is how world politics work. And I think we see it at play now when it comes to Israel in the United Nations. We are not, it's not within their best interest, most of the countries of the world, to support Israel. I mean, especially since the beginning of the Arab boycott and the power the Arab League and the Arab countries had over global energy, especially oil, and the way the political blocks in the United Nations kind of work. So it doesn't serve anyone's interest, even if they think that we're right and a lot of injustice is being done to us, and we hear it in private conversation. It still doesn't lead them, in more often than not, unfortunately, to raise their hand and vote for the right thing when push comes to shove in the United Nations. So let's remember, there's a lot of cynicism and there's a lot of realpolitik and there's a lot of interest that needs to be served on the international community. And so we need to just know why we're here, understand the history, understand our legal rights, understand why we are fighting for what we know we deserve to have, and try to navigate the politics.
Right. And the man who really deserves tremendous amount of credit, although he never lived to see it, in all of this was, of course, Theodor Herzl, who in his day was thought to be mad and delusional and trucking in the realm of the fantastic by trying to meet with the Sultan, by trying to meet with the Kaiser, and here, 16 years, he dies in 1904, and 16 years after his death, not one country, not two, but a collection of the great powers of the world basically ratify his vision and his dream of what a sovereign Jewish state could mean, not only for the Jewish people, but for all of humanity. And it really is on a, taking a step back on a historical basis, it's a breathtaking achievement that you mentioned Weizmann and Aronson and Max Nordau. Of course, there's a whole slew of great leaders who, in a very short time, were able to focus the world's attention on this issue and take it to a level, as you say, in terms of codifying all of this in San Remo, then into the League of Nations, and then into the United Nations. So that's it for me. Is there anything you want to leave us with, Yifa, before we turn it over to others?
Yeah, I do, because I think you spoke very inspirational words, and I just want to agree with you and say that, sometimes, I can't even tell you how many times people told me that, I'm dreaming too big and this is not possible. And, people are focused on the fact that a lot of the world is against us, and this is going wrong and that is going wrong. And I actually think we should look at it in the exact opposite way. Look at what one person was able to do. Look at what each and every one of us we're able to do in our career, in our lifetime, maybe just as a hobby, maybe just as once in a while. Everything that each and every one of us is able to do is extremely helpful. And every time you dream big, there's a chance that this enormous dream will someday become a reality. So I just want to encourage everybody.
Stay a reality. We've got a dream, and let's keep it a reality. Yifa, that was terrific. I very much appreciated. Hope our viewers did as well. And now I'm going to ask Irving to take over from here. Thanks, Yifa. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Yifa. And Doug. Mordechai Kedar, Lieutenant Colonel Mordechai Kedar served in the IDF Intelligence Corps for 25 years, specializing in Arab mass media and Islamic groups. He's a lecturer on the Middle East and Islam at Bar Ilan University. He's fully fluent in Arabic and a fearless defender of Israel, even in hostile places like Al Jazeera. Here is an excerpt of a video of Mordechai Kedar that has gone viral. David, would you play the clip?
الآن معنا من تل أبيب مردخاي كيدار من قسم الدراسات العربية في جامعة بار إيلان. سيد مردخاي، هذا القرار هل هو دق مزيد من الأسافين في نعش المفاوضات الفلسطينية الإسرائيلية؟
أنا حقيقة لا أفهم هذا الكلام. هل على إسرائيل أن تبحث عن إذن من أين في العالم؟ هذه عاصمتنا منذ 3000 عام، وكنا هناك عندما كان آباؤكم يشربون الخمر ويئدون البنات ويعبدون العزى واللات والمنات، فلماذا علينا أن نتكلم عن هذا الشيء؟ هذه هي مدينتنا من 3000 عام وإلى أبد الآبدين.
يا أخي إذا كنت تريد عفوا سيد مردخاي عفوا إذا كنت تريد أن تتحدث عن التاريخ أيضا نحن نتحدث عن القرآن. لا يمكن لك أن تلغي القدس من القرآن. أرجوك أن تبتعد عن الألفاظ التي تسيء للعرب والمسلمين رجاء لنبقى في موضوعنا لو سمحت. الآن هذا القرار ألا يتعارض؟
لم يرد ذكر القدس في القرآن.
سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده.
ذكر القدس لم يرد في القرآن طيب ولو مرة واحدة.
يا سيدي لنتحدث بالسياسة. عفوا لنتحدث بالسياسة.
الجزيرة
لنتحدث بالسياسة لو سمحت.
أوكي. القدس خارج المفاوضات، القدس لليهود نكتة.
There are another 5 minutes of that video on YouTube if anybody would like to check it out. Moti, as he is known to his friends, is also a researcher at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies and Analysis for Middle East Issues at Israel's Channel 14, as well as at the Makor Rishon weekly newspaper. Moti, we have heard from Yifa Segal very clearly that San Remo resolution in 1920 unequivocally recognized the Jewish people's rights to the land of Israel. Initially, it was to all of Palestine, including that part that the British gave away 2 years later in 1922 to the Hashemite clan to create what would become the Kingdom of Jordan. This, one could say, was the original two-state solution. And yet, despite this being the fact, there seems to be historical amnesia, not only in the Arab world, but more importantly in the Western world, both in North America and in Europe. Through a very clever process, the Arabs of Palestine, led thanks to the British by a Nazi collaborator, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, succeeded in the greatest instance of identity theft ever in the world. As the Jews named their Altes Neues Land, their new old country, Eretz Yisrael, the Arabs latched onto the name Palestine, which up until that time, in fact, referred to the Jews who lived in Ottoman Palestine. And now CNN, Reuters, and the major legacy media have fallen under the spell of this Arab propaganda narrative that the Arabs are the indigenous people of Eretz Yisrael and that we Jews are usurpers and occupiers. And moreover, we ourselves have fallen into the trap, including Netanyahu and Bennett and the Israeli media, and even Zionist organizations, by referring to the Arabs as Palestinians. Each time we refer to them as Palestinians, we add another brick to the wall of lies, with the result that we are believed to be occupiers even of Judea, the place that gave us our name as Jews. Moti, knowing the legal rights of the Jewish people to this land is very important. But in addition to that, we clearly need to know more in order to refute these lies. I would like to ask you to elaborate on how to counter the Arab propaganda campaign, which presents the Arabs as indigenous to Palestine. Please explain to us, who exactly are the Arabs of Palestine? When did they arrive? Where did they come from? Do these Arabs, in fact, predate the Jewish Hebrew presence in the land of Israel? Or is this really a clever campaign of outrageous lies in the style of the Nazi Goebbels? Is Israel an occupier of Judea? Or is that the opposite of the truth, repeated so frequently that our ahistorical world actually believes it? Mati.
Well, thank you so much, Irving, for such an introduction, which I'm afraid is too high and hires the expectations of the audience. First of all, second thing, I would like to dedicate my part in this conference to two dear people. First of all is Howard Grief, a lawyer who dedicated his life to the question of the legality of the state of Israel. Another dear man, dear friend, Solomon Ben Zimra, who also actually wrote a booklet about this, which was translated to Hebrew, thanks to dear people like Goldi, and is today in Israel being disseminated by Tirtzu. These two people left us, and they would have been here in this conference, no doubt, if they had been alive these days. Ladies and gentlemen, what Yifa presented so in such a bright way as the basis for international law, as the basis of everything which the world actually is functioning about and by, is definitely the cornerstone for the international law and for concepts which actually drive the world. However, these bases of the international law are absolutely unacceptable by the Arab and the Islamic world. They were not acceptable in the beginning to begin with, and they are not accepted now. What do I mean? When a Muslim, and it doesn't have to be a radical Muslim, either Arab or non-Arab, like Iranian or whoever, when he hears the League of Nations decided to give the Jews the Palestine as it was then, he immediately asks himself, who the heck gave that land to the British or to the French or to the Americans or the Japanese or the Russians or any other country which voted in favor of giving this land to the Jews? Who gave them this land? Does this land belong to the Japanese, for example, or to the Russians to vote in favor of giving this land to Jews? And for him, he absolutely does not understand what a chutzpah these countries, which were members of the League of Nations, so that to take the courage and to give an Islamic land to Jews who should live under the Islamic yoke as dhimmis, as we learned from Bat Yaor. So these decisions, which we consider to be the basis of the international law, are absolutely not accepted by Muslims and especially by Arabs. So to say that this is the basis of the international law and this is acceptable globally, there is nothing more far from the reality when it comes to the Arab world. They don't recognize the legality of these decisions, let alone the Article 80 of the United Nations, which actually perpetuates these decisions. So first of all, we have to rewind our definition of international law. These are laws which are acceptable by the United States, by Europe, by democratic countries, by Australia, by New Zealand, by some maybe more countries in Eastern Europe today, but not acceptable by, or not accepted by, the Islamic world in general, and especially the Arab world. Yet, what changed the attitude to Israel through the years is the fact that Israel became, first of all, a fact on the ground in 1948, and not because they agreed to accept us. They never agreed to accept us. They accept us only because they cannot wipe us out from this place. And Israel actually forced itself, with the help of normal nations like the United States and other countries which recognized Israel and supported Israel by, first of all, weapons from the beginning. We got weapons from Czechoslovakia those days, because the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, was behind us and helped us with leftovers from the Second World War. Yes, this is what made our neighbors recognize us not as an entity which should have been according to the international law, but because an entity which forced itself on its neighbors by force. Yes, this is the beginning. And this is why they came with us, not to peace agreements in 1949. They came with us to agreements of non-belligerence, of ceasefire. That's all. And the borders which Israel had for many years were not borders as they are in the international law. They were ceasefire lines. Because how can you say a border with an entity behind the line you don't recognize its rights to exist? Because a border is a line between two countries which mutually recognize each other. So they have a border which they agreed. But here they never, especially in 1949, they never agreed to the mere existence of the state of Israel. So how can they have a border with an entity which doesn't exist? This is why, the way, until this very day, the Arab discourse talks about us as kiyan in Arabic, which entity, which not even defined as a state. To this degree, the illegality of the legal decisions starting in San Remo and continuing into the United Nations are viewed by too many in the Arab and the Islamic world as illegal decisions. And this is why they don't recognize the right of Israel to exist. So first of all, we have to change our view to the international law. No, it is not an internationally accepted law when it comes to the existence of Israel. We have to change the discourse. We have to understand that this part of the world does not recognize the legality of these decisions which Israel bases itself upon. This is one thing. Second thing, the reason which too many countries in the world hesitate, for example, with the question of Jerusalem, to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of the Jews, as it is for more than 3,000 years, is because of politics. Why politics? Because the Arabs have oil, and the oil, in this case, played a major role in the betrayal of the British Empire in the 30s, the white paper. And although the mandate, they were committed by the mandate to allow Jewish mass migration to Eretz Israel, to the land of Israel, in order to save those Jews, they betrayed their commitment. And just to show you only two books, which were for many who were authored about this: Palestine, Retreat from the Mandate, a book by Michael Cohen, and another one by William Ziff, The Rape of Palestine. Two very important books which actually show how the British Empire betrayed the Jewish people. And let me here add another very important comment. Adolf Hitler, when he started the Second World War in September of 1939, he wanted Europe to be Judenrein, means clean of Jews. From his point of view, Jews could be exported to whoever would accept them. America, Canada, Cuba, or the British Empire here in Israel, wherever. He did not have the intention from the beginning to build this death machine, which he built later. Only in 1941, 2 years later, 2 years, he understood that the world does not accept those Jews. He even heard very well what the Canadian Minister of Migration said when the St. Louis ship came with some 900 Jews before the war, and they came to Halifax. He said that none are too many. Means not even one Jew should be allowed to come to Canada. So he saw that everybody's closing the gates in front of the Jews. Nobody accepts them. And not only this, Britain, who had the commitment from the mandate to accept the Jews and to allow mass migration, betrayed its commitment. So in order to have Europe clean of Jews, he initiated this death industry, the death camps and the trains and everything which was there. Means that Britain actually has a responsibility. Britain has a responsibility for the Holocaust. And somehow Britain succeeded to sneak out from this responsibility. Because today, when we talk about Hanazim ve'ozreihem, the Nazis and their helpers, we're talking about the Ukrainians, we talk about the Croats, the Serbs, the Romanians, and many others, and we forget about the British. Had Britain not put a blockade on the shores of what was the Palestine, Eretz Israel, and allow mass migration of Jews to Eretz Israel, millions of Jews would be saved. Millions of Jews who were exterminated in the death machine of the Nazis. And people today forgot it, forgot the British role. Look, I'm not trying to reduce the responsibility of the Nazis or the Ukrainians who helped them. I'm not trying to that at all. But Britain came out from this responsibility as clean as Maria Theresa. And this is wrong, because if they did not implement the white paper and did not close the seashores of this country, millions of Jews could be saved. Unfortunately, even the Jews do not talk about this. I think that Britain should at least apologize to the Jewish people for betrayal of their mandate. And between you and me, it continues until this very day. Because Britain and other European countries, and I'm afraid that Canada as well, and the United States, some do support the so-called Palestinians in order to establish a state which will make them the death to Israel. Like the salami, as Arafat said it. We will take whatever we are given and we will make the Jews run away from this country. This was the plan of Arafat. And how do I know? They show it. Because in this scarf, which they disseminate, they say Jerusalem is ours, and this is the PLO flag. The PLO, they say Jerusalem is ours, Al-Quds Lana, and the other side is the Palestine, Philistine, and this is PLO. So where is Israel? Where is Israel if the whole country is Palestine? So this is actually what is happening. And they did not change their views about the international law, which gave Israel the right to exist. Now, to your question, Evan, about the so-called Palestinians. I must regret. Yes, I am, saying, Chatati aviti pashati. I once started a whole research about the names of the so-called Palestinians. I actually based this research on the telephone guide, which I have printed. And the telephone guide actually of the Arabs in Israel, because it is in Arabic, actually gives all the family names of the Arabs in Israel. In Israel proper, means within the green line, the so-called green line. And in these names, you can find hundreds of names which testify that these people are not indigenous. For example, the head or the manager of the Ra'am party, the Islamic Movement Party, which is today in the Knesset and in the coalition, his name is Ibrahim Hijazi. Hijazi means somebody who came from the Hijaz. The Hijaz is in Saudi Arabia. Means by his name Hijazi, he testifies that he actually came from Saudi Arabia. His family. Others are named El Masri, means the Egyptian. Masarwa, Egyptians in plural. Al-Khorani, from the Khoran in Syria. Al-Sorani, from Sor, which is Tyre in Lebanon. Sidawi, from Sidon in Lebanon. Tarabulsi, from Tarablus, Tripoli in Lebanon. Karaki in Jordan. Zarqawi in Jordan. Fayumi in Egypt. And many, many names which testify that they are not indigenous. Look, I'm not saying that the whole country was totally empty when we started to come to towards the end of the 19th century. No, there were some families here and there, but not in such numbers. Definitely not. These names were not here. All these names were in those places. When they came, the people who lived here named them by the place which they came from in order to make sure that they will not approach our daughters. This is the mindset here in the Middle East. You name somebody as a foreigner in order to make sure that nobody marries his daughter to this man, because he is, as they say in Arabic, nicht kanunzerer. You know what this means? Not one of us. This is in Yiddish, but it's the same idea. Mush minna, they say in Arabic. No, not from us. And this is, by the way, why refugees who ran away from the war in 1948 are also here in this country, near Nablus and near Hebron and near Ramallah and near Tulkarem and near Kalkilia. How can they be refugees in their country if this is their country? How can they be recognized as refugees if they are in their own country, as they claim? No, they are not refugees. They are refugees because they had to run away from the village, which they said when they came from Egypt. So they are not, since they are not of us, so let them live in a camp forever. And this is actually another proof which they are not indigenous. They are not indigenous in this country. So here you are. We are living here with a population which on one side, they don't recognize the Israeli right to exist. And from the other side, they disseminate the lie that they are indigenous. And unfortunately, there are too many people in the world who think that they have the right to be here or to replace the state of Israel. And they, in some countries, actually finance the education system of the Palestinian Authority, which perpetuates this idea that Israel has no right to exist, as recently was found again and again and again by an organization named Impact SE, which actually made a whole research about the school system and the school books and the textbooks of the Palestinian Authority. So here you are, they live in a total denial of the right of the Jews to this country. They live in a total denial of the right of Israel as a state to exist, as a state of the Jews. And they deny totally the right of the Jews to be on this land as owners of the land, because according to the Islamic law, Jews should live under the yoke of Islam as dhimmis, as people who live in the auspice, under the auspice of Islam. In another thing, which we all always should remember, many in the Islamic world do not recognize us as a nation. They look at us as communities which belong to all the nations in the world. A Canadian Jew is a Canadian who happened to be Jewish, a Canadian who happened to be Jewish. A Moroccan Jew is a Moroccan Arab who happened to be Jewish, just like others who are Muslims. A Jew in Russia is a Russian national who happened to be Jewish, and so forth. They are not a nation, means Jews are not a nation, and that's why they don't deserve a state. If they are not a nation, why should they have a state? Another thing we should all remember, that according to the Islamic view, Islam came to the world to replace Judaism and Christianity. They actually took the theory of replacement one step forward, and since Islam came to the world to replace Judaism, why do you need a Jewish state? Judaism is null and void, just like Christianity. So this is how they think about Judaism. So in their view, there is absolutely no reason to have a Jewish state. The Jewish religion does not exist anymore since Islam came to the world, and the Jews are not a nation anyway, and the land is Islamic land. And according to the Islamic Sharia, the Islamic law, there is no way to take a land out of Islam. A land is only one-way ticket to come into Islam and not out from Islam. So all these reasons accumulated, in addition to the fact that they do not recognize the legality of decisions like San Remo, even the Balfour Declaration is illegal. How could the Minister of Her Majesty promise a land which does not belong to the British to people who do not deserve to have this land? This is how they relate to the Balfour Declaration. And who the heck gave the Japanese the right to vote in the League of Nations in San Remo to give the land to Jews? Does it belong to Japan or to Russia or to all the other countries which voted in favor of this decision? Okay, so this is how they look from the Islamic point of view and the Arab national point of view. And when you combine together all these points of view, you can understand why, in the eyes of our neighbors, Israel has no right to exist. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the core of my words here. And now we have to fight them. And so where is the hope? Is totally hopeless? No. There is a hope. And the hope is rooted in the Islamic tradition. In the Islamic tradition, a peace can be given to an entity which is invincible. Because it is invincible, because it is dangerous to mess with it. There could be a temporary peace which can be given to this entity, only because it is too powerful and invincible. If Israel will be powerful and invincible, Israel can get temporary peace, as it has with Egypt and others. If Israel will be invincible forever, Israel will have temporary peace forever. This is how things work in the Middle East. We are not living in North America. We are not living in Europe. We are not living in any other part of the world which recognizes the international law. Here, the law which works is only the law of the powerful and the one who succeeds to convince its neighbors that for their own good, they should leave him alone. And this is actually, in essence, this is the peace which we have with our neighbors. Thank you so much.
Moti, thank you very, very much. You've given us some things to think about very, very seriously. I'd like to now turn the meeting over to Agnes and Goldi for a question and answer.
Thank you, Irving. So we have some fantastic questions. I'd like to address the first question to Dr. Mordechai Kedar. So one of the participants asks, do Israelis realize how badly they're losing the forum of public opinion around the world? Do they realize this is an existential threat to the Jewish state? Why do they not go on the offensive in the propaganda war? If the Arabs do not and will not recognize the rights of the Jews, how will we ever have peace?
Well, the answer is very clear. The entity here in Israel, which with the body which is in charge of what we call Hasbara, is actually the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is a ministry which was manned by the minister Shimon Peres, mainly, and his deputy Yossi Beilin. These people never talked about the historical rights of the Jews, the religious rights, and even the legal rights. Means all they said time and again that we want peace, 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 and peace. I'll give you a good example. We here in Israel, we have documents. For example, this booklet, A Brief Guide to Al-Haram al-Sharif, Jerusalem, published by the Supreme Muslim Council as of 1925, like 20 years, they published this booklet because this was the ticket for a tour in the Temple Mount. And here the Mufti who published it, the Mufti Haj Amin al-Husseini, was a great Jew hater. He writes, in English very, very clearly in a way which cannot be interpreted otherwise. Let me read you one sentence which he writes. The Mufti, he writes, means the Temple Mount identity with the site of Solomon's temple is beyond dispute. The Mufti writes it. Israel never used this booklet in order to show that even the Mufti recognized the right of the Jew or the history of the Jewish nation here in Jerusalem. This is one thing. Second thing, another booklet, which is a guide to the West Bank of Jordan. And this is published by the Jordanian government, which has a map in the first page, which talks, and this is the map, which shows the Temple Mount, and it writes Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah by the Jordanians. And this was published in the early 60s, 1963, before the Jordanians became Zionists. Okay, they never became Zionists. But they write about Temple Mount, Mount Moriah. Why the heck the Ministry of Foreign Affairs doesn't use these original documents, the one published by the Mufti under the mandate, and the other one by the Jordanians who occupied Jerusalem illegally? Why don't they use these documents which can be bought in eBay? Okay, they don't use these things to show how even Arabs, before Israel occupied Jerusalem, they related to Jerusalem as a Jewish place, the Mufti and the Jordanians. Unfortunately, it is not politically correct to show them that they are liars. And yes, they are compulsive liars. And I have all the evidence that the whole thing about Jerusalem in the Islamic tradition is based on lies. I didn't say it. Ibn Taymiyyah said it. One of the most important Islamic scholars. He understood the lies which the Umayyads concocted about Jerusalem in order to undermine the centrality of Mecca because of competition between Jerusalem and Mecca, because between the Umayyads and the people who lived in Mecca. So they sanctified Jerusalem in order to be a place for Hajj, for pilgrimage, instead of Mecca. That's the whole thing about the holiness of Jerusalem. But it is not nice to talk about this, that the whole holiness of Jerusalem is based on fake news of the 7th century, which Arab historians write about. Not I talk about this. I only quote Arabs and Muslims who were faithful to the religion, who did not accept these concoctions by the Umayyads, who made all these lies about Jerusalem. So okay, so we have to use this information based on history and the Islamic sources in order to show that the whole land belongs to the Jews. A friend of mine, Professor Nissim Dan, wrote a whole book about the Islamic sources which testify that this country belongs to the Jews. Okay, so why doesn't the Israeli PR use this information and these books? Good question. I have absolutely no answer, except for the fact that it's not politically correct to show that the other side are liars. It's not nice.
Agnes,
they might be
Agnes, I want to just add something to what Moti has been saying. And the question really was directed at our international problem. But the dirty little secret is that Israel also has an internal problem. In other words, we also have a problem with making sure that our own citizens have the conviction that we are justified to be here, that we are legally, politically, religiously, morally, that this is our place. It sounds strange to say that to people when people, in the diaspora hear that, they say, well, aren't all Israelis Zionists? And the answer is no. No, there is a tremendous currency of anti-Zionism in this country as well. And it is, look, everyone is entitled to their own political opinions, but when we are complicit in things like not singing the Hatikva at a university graduation, not being willing to carry the Israeli flag in the old city, because these things are provocative, then what we're really signaling is that we really don't have that kind of conviction in ourselves. And that is a shame, and that is a self-inflicted wound.
May I interfere here for a moment?
Go ahead, Goldi.
Apart from having 50 questions, I will narrow it down to one, and I would like to concentrate or address both speakers about what we can and must do to change this rhetoric. One particular question is, what can Yafi do, since the government doesn't do what it should be doing to stand up for our rights? Our petition to declare a holiday, I think, would go a long way without it being political or being adverse to anybody. And my next question, a concrete question, what can Yafi or should Yafi do to help the diaspora to spread the word about our rights? Moti or Yifa, this question is for both of you.
I think Yifa is more eligible to answer.
You think, Moti? Look, it's an uphill battle, and it's a constant battle, and there's no right answer, and there's not a one answer. So I think, doing these webinars, having content, spreading the word, getting organizations to be more active, to bring more people in, to have more conversations, more debates. A lot of us, I know Moti has written so many things. We can share what we've written, what we talked about, these recorded sessions, and just spread it as far as wide as possible, because I think, Doug has made a comment about the Israelis, and let me tell you, Israelis are just like anyone else. Like, a lot of people don't want to be political activists. I mean, they want to sit in the beach and have a beer at the end of the day and make money and have children or whatever. I mean, a lot of people are not that, because life is at the end of the day, life is very, very good here. If you look at there was a survey recently, and Israel has risen from the 10th happiest place in the world to the 9th happiest place in the world. I mean, this is really the Israeli reality in most of the time for most of the people. So people don't feel like it's an existential threat, and people are not as obsessed with information as I am. They don't follow the debates in parliaments around the world, and they don't follow Arab media and resolutions in the United Nations, and you name it. All they see and all they know is that this is a good country, a strong country, and the people who are more active in propaganda are the ones who usually get, traction with those who are not actively seeking information. So that's the conclusion. We need to be more active in what we know and what we want to teach others, and get to those people who are not, you don't want to be political activists, but there are ways to reach those people and at least educate them, at least partially, about the truth and about the reality. And it's an uphill battle, as I said, so it's not going to change tomorrow morning. We just have to keep at it. And there's reason to be positive, to be optimistic, because I think the situation today is a lot better than it was 5 years ago, and it's a lot better than it was 10 years ago. A lot more people are more knowledgeable, more connected to what's going on, more passionate about safeguarding the state of Israel, our rights, our existence, fighting against boycott, and the delegitimization movement around the world. So, we're moving in a positive direction.
You've been your absolute best, both of you and Kedar. I still come back to my concrete question. How can we contact, or how can we get assistance from Yifa? What is their role, if not helping diaspora to do what we're doing? We're struggling uphill, and we need help from the Israeli authorities, if not the government, even though we're going to continue asking the government to declare the holiday. But Yifa has a role to play, and we have not been able to contact them. Can you help us? This is my concrete question.
Definitely, there should be good connection between Israel and diaspora. However, and here I have a very important comment. Very few Jews in diaspora feel that they are in the battle. Goldi, you are. Irving, you are. I don't doubt at all. I wish many Israelis were like you, fighting the uphill fight, as Yifa mentioned. However, in my humble feeling, people in Israel, or people in the diaspora, think that the fight for Israel existence and the Israel legitimacy and legal rights and so forth is the task of the Israelis. The Israelis should do it. We live in New York, we live in New Jersey, we live in Toronto, we're in Sydney, Australia, we live in Winnipeg. We don't have, it's not our direct problem. And this is wrong. The land of Israel, the state of Israel belongs to every Jew in the world, just like myself, and I'm a citizen here. Everyone is eligible to come to here and to be a citizen from day one, because of Chok HaShvut, the right of the law of return. So Israel, every Jew in the world should feel that he or she are fighters for Israel, because if they don't fight, who will fight? Okay? Israelis alone are not the only Israelis. All the Jews are Israel, should feel like Israelis. And this is, in my humble view, this is what the Jewish school system, education system should instill in every Jewish boy and girl, that they are fighters for Israel wherever they are and whatever they do, and with, you know what? Yes, and with whoever they marry.
If I can just step in for 1 second to add to the question, what can an individual do in the diaspora to help the situation in Israel? So people who want to do something and they don't know what to do.
Let me tell you something. We have a whole debate about Jerusalem, for example. What is easier than sending or putting on your Facebook page, on your Twitter page, on your Instagram, or send email to your friends and relatives about a new coin, which today is in the news, which was found in Jerusalem from the David's era or Solomon's era or the kings or whatever. This is very easy. You sit near your computer and you become a journalist. You become somebody who is actually fighting. Because if we Jews will not disseminate the information, I'm not talking about propaganda, I'm talking about information, archaeology. You know, what happens in the Middle East, that the Arabs in the Middle East and Muslims as well, around them, believe that the archaeology here in this country, 80% of it is Islamic, 18% is Christian, and 2% is Canaanite. The Jews have absolutely no archaeology in this country, and Jews, when they were here, they were like Bedouins, came and went away. This is the common belief in the Arab and the Islamic world, and they recycle this 80, 18, and 2 numbers all the time in all the Arab media. And now, gay kriegt mit Zai. Go and start fighting them. They are more than convinced that there is no Jewish archaeology in this country. And the Jewish archaeology, which is in this country, is all forged by the Zionists. This is what they claim. Look, this can be refuted by facts. Let me give you one little fact. As you know, in Jerusalem, there is the Shiloach tunnel, which brought the water from outside, from the Ma'ayan Gichon, into the city. And this tunnel was dug in the days of Chizkiyahu the king, which was like 800 years before Christ. When the workers met with each other, they dug it from both sides, and they met in the middle. They wrote on the wall, there was an inscription describing the minute which they actually met with each other from both sides, because a hammer knocked a hammer from both sides. And they were so excited, so they wrote on the wall what happened. The Turkish Empire stole this inscription, and this inscription today is in display in Istanbul. So we can relate. Hey guys, go to Istanbul and look at our history in Jerusalem a millennia and a half before Islam came to the world. Israelis do not do it. Unfortunately, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they don't do it. Okay? Unfortunately, every Jew can do it in every part of the world. Can, you know, just Google the inscription of the Shiloach, you will find it. Start sending it to your friends, to your relatives, to your colleagues, to wherever, which shows that Jews were there in Jerusalem more than 1,000 years before the first Muslim came to the world. Okay, so this is what I mean by using materials which were found in this country, which the Ottomans actually robbed from this country, and we can use them. Or things in the British Museum and others. You don't have to rely on the Israelis who might forge. Okay, so this the lies of our neighbors are so easy to be refuted. You have no idea, but for this you need a little knowledge and little information about archaeology. And look, there is a whole periodical, Christian periodical, Jewish archaeology, biblical archaeology. This is the name of the publication. We can use it. Biblical Archaeology. This is the name of the publication, as much as I remember. And it comes out, I think this is a quarterly. Like every 3 months, you have another issue of biblical archaeology, which mostly is Jewish. We can use it because this is a scientific publication. It's not forgery by the Israelis. This is a scientific publication. So there is enough material to refute the lies, which everybody, with a little Google, can find the tip of his fingers.
Uzi, you wanted to say something.
I'll be very short and very optimist. I used to be the national security advisor of 2 governments here in Israel, and it was often asked, what is the most strategic asset of Israel? Now, everybody thought that I will say this is the F-35 or what we don't, or the America Mark 6 or 7, or what we don't think, what we don't talk about because of the ambiguity policy. No. The most important asset, strategic asset of Israel is Jerusalem and the connection, the relation, the unity between Israel and the Jewish communities. Now you ask, what shall I do as a Jew? What you have to do, it's 2 things. One is Jewish education, and Israel should help on Jewish education abroad. And 2 is come to Israel. I believe that about, 50% of the American Jews have never been to Israel. Come to Israel, come for a visit, whatever. I'm Zionist, so I want you to come here for forever, but do whatever you think, but go and see in your own eyes. Now, why I'm so optimist? Because Israel is going in the right direction. Politically, they are pretty much a mess now, but if we look to the future, first of all, there are 3 strategic challenges that Israel met better than everybody. As I told you, I was the head of the security committee on the negotiations, so I know people from Iran to the Maghreb and from Turkey to the Emirates, etc. And years ago, they used to say, look, let's be frank, let's be honest with you, we hate you. Not you personally, you are a nice guy, but you, the Israelis, came to the Middle East, you do whatever you want, you don't understand our mentality, you don't understand our tradition, and so on, and you are going to end up like the Crusaders. That was the saying. In the last years, they are not saying anymore. They say, look, we don't like you. This is a big change in the Middle East. Before, we hate you and we don't like you. Now, I know you don't like me, but what they are really saying, we are jealous of you. They are so jealous of us. And those people give very, very concrete issues, like a very concrete strategic asset, like water. Israel is one of the only state on earth that actually solved the shortage of water. 2 is energy. All of a sudden, Israel is independent energetically. People used to say that we are the Holy Land because we used to drill holes everywhere in order to find oil. And we didn't. All of a sudden, there's a lot of oil, actually gas, better than oil. And 3, demography. We are going to be here 15 million Jews. So everybody can lose his dreams and hopes about the Crusaders. The Crusaders, I don't remember Moti was here, how many, 120, 140,000 people? So what I'm saying to our brothers and sisters, the Jews, join us because we are going in the right direction. And what we need now is Jerusalem, it's in our hands, and defensible borders. Together, we are going to be more than 15 million years by the year 2048, because of the corona, the post-corona aliyah immigration, and actually the post-Ukrainian immigration aliyah to Israel. So this is what we have to do. We are going to the right direction, and join us. We don't force you, we don't tell you what to do, etc. But Jewish education, and come and see Israel. And if you stay here, they love you.
Thank you, Uzi and Mordechai and Yifa. I'd like to hand it over to Irving now for closing remarks.
Thank you, Agnes. I'd just like to close with a little bit of information about CILR. The overriding mission of CILR is education, mentioned many times this morning, well, this evening, depending on where you are. Bringing awareness to the world of the undeniable facts of Israel's legal rights. We also have an important work in progress. An educational package is being prepared with the purpose of empowering educators on how to respond to students who have been exposed to the anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist tropes that Jews are occupiers and Palestinian Arabs are indigenous. Third, a top priority today, of course, is to convince the government of Israel to declare the 25th of April a national holiday to be called Yom Remo. Doing so will ensure that the education of our own people, especially our children, about the Jewish people's rights to the land, something that will have implications far into the future. And finally, we must encourage the world, starting with, and especially our own friends and organizations, schools and news media, use the term Palestinian Arabs, or Arabs of Israel, or Arabs of Gaza, or Arabs of the PA, as opposed to the term Palestinians. We must ourselves stop promoting the falsehood of Palestinian indigeneity. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Special thanks to our panelists and those who were involved in organizing the event. Please feel free to visit our website, and should you choose to lend a helping hand, donations are always welcome. Thank you very, very much.